welcome. This Sunday, many thousands are expected to march through Manhattan to demand action against climate change. This 2 days before world leaders converge for a climate summit at the United Nations. Recent unsettling news about rising sea levels is also fueling this demonstration. We'll get to that in a moment. Our public intellectual segment today examines some psychological research that may explain why some people will take to the streets on Sunday while others happily drive by in their SUVs. Then we'll turn our attention to the application of big spreadsheets to little things like what exact amount to put on your Metro card so the MTA doesn't end up keeping the change. And were you saddened when developers whitewashed that graffiti mecca in Queens called 5 Points? Well, cheer up, there's an app showing there's plenty more people's art where that came from. First though, climate change. If the people's movement against global warming is indeed about to grow in size and power, it may well be the result not just of catastrophic events like Sandy, but some recent scientific findings that show sea levels rising higher than previously predicted. In one study, 10 feet higher. Jonathan Bamber, professor of physical geography at the University of Bristol, studies glaciers and sea level rise. How worried is he? Professor Bamber joins us now via Skype from Bristol, England. Hello. Hello from New York.
Hi, pleased to be with you.
How important is the melting of ice caps to climate change at large, first of all?
So there's a range of damaging effects of climate change, but many scientists, many policymakers believe by far and away the most important impact of climate change is going to be sea level rise. Just to give you some kind of figures, a sea level rise of about 1 meter would displace around about 200 million people. The costs of 1 meter sea level rise in terms of asset loss go into the trillions of dollars.
Why would such what might seem to people like a small amount, a meter or about a yard or about 3 feet in American terms, why would that cause such massive displacement? People watching this may think, well, we can compensate for 3 feet, we can build seawalls higher, we can put our buildings up just a little bit higher.
Yeah,
Why such massive displacement?
You can do that, but if you look at the coastline of many countries, if you look at Florida, for example, it's estimated that something like 5% of people in Florida will be displaced by a sea level rise of about 1 meter. So it's extremely expensive and it's extremely costly to protect all that coastline. Countries like Bangladesh just can't afford to do it. 1 meter of sea level rise means that a very significant proportion of that country will be flooded almost on an annual basis. And I can't tell you exactly what population of Bangladesh is, but it's in the tens of millions. Countries like Holland, where they've reclaimed quite a lot of low-lying land from the sea, just cannot, they cannot build the dikes that much higher. There are mechanical factors that mean that a sea level rise of about 1.5 meters means that the dikes just can't sustain that level of pressure. So there are.
And why isn't it evenly distributed? I read, for example, that the United States would suffer proportionally more sea level rise than other places that have as much coastline. Is that correct?
That's right. So the processes for regional variations in sea level rise are quite complicated, but to try and explain, so the ice sheets, they're big masses of ice. The Antarctic ice sheet is 5 kilometers thick. That's like over 3 miles thick. It's got an area that's bigger than the conterminous USA. It's a big piece of ice. Now, if you start to take some of that ice, and you don't need to take that much, and stick it in the oceans, it changes the gravity field of the Earth a little bit. And what that means is that around Antarctica, the gravity field goes down, and so water is not pulled towards Antarctica quite so much, but it's pulled more, or the effect of the gravity is compensated at distances a long way away from Antarctica. And it turns out that the seaboards of North America are going to be the most severely affected by reductions in mass of the Antarctic ice sheet, particularly West Antarctica, that we believe is especially vulnerable to small changes in ocean temperature.
So, as to your best scientific guess, how would that affect New York?
So the projections of sea level rise, we're talking about, let's say, the next century up to 2100, vary quite a bit because it depends what we as humans do. It depends how much we warm the planet, how much CO2 we pump into the atmosphere. But some of the higher end projections are around about a meter of sea level rise. And so for New York, we would be looking at projections which are around about 20 to 30% higher than the global mean. That might be 1.2 meters or something like that. Okay, so if you do nothing, the effects would be pretty devastating for places like New York, many coastal cities, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, San Francisco, Seattle, you name it. But, there are things you can do, like building the dikes and even moving people away from coastal areas. But, all those things are very expensive options.
What do you hope for in the coming climate summit among the world leaders to address this issue in particular? Is there anything, or do you just hope that they come up with an agreement to stave off as much global warming as possible in general?
Well, that's a good question. So, I'm a scientist, and I present the information to the policymakers. It's impossible for me to make the policy. What I would like them to do is to rather than have lots of words, show some action in terms of trying to reduce the carbon emissions of the human race. So, in the UK, both the Conservative, both main political parties in the UK claim that they are strong advocates against, strong advocates for reducing the effects of climate change. But if you look at what we've done, it's really very minimal, and our CO2 emissions have carried on increasing over the last decade. So really, there's an awful lot of talk, but very little action by governments nationally and internationally. And the former chief scientific advisor of the UK government, a guy called Sir David King, said that climate change is probably the biggest crisis that has ever faced the human race. And I think in many respects he's right. If you look at the potential for collateral damage, the potential for societal damage, for the socioeconomic consequences, the mass migration it's going to cause, it's a really, really serious problem. And the problem with it is that it knows no boundaries. So it's not a national issue. It's a global issue, and that appears to be a really, really challenging problem for the global political community.
Scientifically speaking, does the sea level rise come only from the fact that these dense ice sheets are melting, and so that turns into water, and there's more water, more liquid flowing toward the coasts of all these countries? Or does something also happen because the water is warmer?
So there's actually several different effects that influence sea level rise. That the land surface is going up or down. So you can have subsidence, you can have you can have something called glacial isostatic adjustment, which is in parts of North America where you had an ice sheet covering the land. It's actually the ground is sort of bouncing back up after the removal of that ice sheet, called the Laurentide ice sheet. Those are relatively small effects, okay? By far and away, the two biggest effects are thermal expansion of the oceans that you just mentioned. As they warm, they expand, and over the last century, thermal expansion was probably the dominant effect on sea level rise. And the second big one is the melting of ice sheets and glaciers. And just to put things into context a little bit, the Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet together have enough ice in them to raise global sea level by 65 meters. That's about 200 feet. Now, nobody's suggesting that all of that is going to disappear tomorrow, but even a 10% change in the volume of those two ice masses is like 20 feet of sea level rise.
That's an incredibly scary prospect. That's an incredibly scary set of statistics. Let me ask you how that data is generated, or the actual measurements of what's already taken place. Is it people out in Antarctica and places like that with ice picks and rulers, or is it all satellite data at this point?
Well, so as I mentioned, Antarctica is a big place. You know, it's bigger than the conterminous USA. And it's probably one of the most hostile environments you can operate in. Coldest temperatures, the strongest winds on the planet. And it's pretty remote as well. So, you know, it's right down at the bottom. Scientists do work on the ground, and the measurements they make, we should say the in situ measurements they make, are very important for validating the observations we get from space. But now, you know, to understand what the whole ice sheet is doing at the continental scale, satellites are really the only way we can do it. So we kind of need a combination of the two. We need people on the ground validating those satellite observations, but we have some seriously impressive technology up there that can measure changes in the surface elevation of the ice sheet to, you know, a few millimeters a year. These same satellites are measuring changes in the ocean surface to about 1 millimeter a year or something. And they're flying at an altitude of about 600 miles up and at speeds of about 4 miles a second. So, you know, it's impressive technology.
Wow. And do all those different technologies tend to match up in terms of the results they produce and the projections of how horrible the future might be in these terms? I know you did a meta-study recently where you looked at many different scientists' results using many different techniques, correct?
Yeah, okay, so you've sort of done your homework on this, so these satellites are very complex. There are all kinds of corrections you have to apply. Like I said, they're flying, you know, at incredible speeds, the different approaches that we can use. So we can measure small changes in the gravity field of the Earth. We can look at small changes in the volume of the ice sheets. We can look at how fast they're flowing. These various different techniques we use don't always match up. What I would say, though, is the one thing that all these observations are showing, and all scientists are absolutely in union about this, is that mass loss from both Greenland and Antarctica has been accelerating over the last 20 years, which is when we've had kind of reliable satellite data that covering both ice sheets. So that's something that we're very confident about. The exact numbers, yes, there are some differences, but the fact that they're both, you know, more mass is disappearing from both Greenland and Antarctica is unequivocal.
Fascinating. And yes, we are the show that does its homework. What am I looking at over your left shoulder? That circle with the yellow blob in it, is that Antarctica?
That's actually the underneath of Antarctica. It's actually the bedrock beneath the ice sheet. So this was sort of goes back to work that I did for my PhD about a long time ago. To actually know what is underneath this 3 miles of ice, you fly aeroplanes. You can't do it from space for various reasons to do with the physics of the atmosphere. You fly airplanes over the ice sheet with a radio transmitter on the airplane, and it sends pulses of radio waves through the ice. Ice is transparent at megahertz frequencies, and it bounces off the bedrock underneath. It actually travels through 3 miles of ice, bounces off the bottom, back up to the airplane, and you can measure ice thickness that way. So that's the bedrock of Antarctica. And just one other little, I don't know about chilling statistic, but, you know, interesting statistic. Parts of the Antarctic bedrock lie 2.5 kilometers. Okay, you do miles. So that's about 1.5 miles below sea level. So
Go ahead.
Go on.
Go ahead. What does that mean?
So those bits of the ice sheet that are resting on bedrock so far below sea level are particularly vulnerable to changes in ocean temperature.
Fascinating. Well, you've scared us all half to death, but I think that's probably a good thing, so people have a better understanding of what's at stake and how it works as we head into the Climate March and Climate Summit here in New York over the coming days. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, my pleasure.
Time for Public Intellectual, where we look at research with the power to change our minds and public policy. I'm Brian Lehrer. According to a Dutch study we came across, bad news about climate change rolls right off people's backs if they have an overly positive view of scientific progress. And it may be the media's fault. How does a researcher test for the hypothesis that optimism leads to inaction? Joining us via Skype, University of Amsterdam social psychologist Marijn Meijers. Welcome to the program. Hello from New York.
Hello.
Explain the theory behind your research, if you would, which I see is called compensatory control theory.
Yes, it's actually a theory from a researcher called Aaron Kay, and he investigated the idea that people always want to have the feeling that the world is meaningful and under control. And he came up with the idea that that feeling that things are under control can provide people with the feeling that things are orderly. And he set out two ways that people can feel this feeling of control, which is internal or personal control and external control. And the idea is that if people lack, for example, internal control or personal control, that they can compensate this with external control. And based on his theory, we thought, well, one of external controls that people are familiar with is science, because science is able to provide solutions to problems. So when science would take over all the problems that are there and make sure that they are solved, people will not feel it's necessary anymore to exert personal control, which means that in the end, they wouldn't feel it's necessary anymore to behave environmentally friendly. And that's what we tested in our research.
In other words, if people believe that they don't have much control over the fate of the environment through their individual choices, then they're more likely to compensate for that by believing in scientific progress. And then if they believe that scientific progress might solve the problem, then that makes them less likely to actually try to do anything responsible personally for the environment?
Exactly, yeah. So when you believe that things are being solved, or when somebody's there to already take control over the problem, you will be less likely to take control yourself.
So you have several studies that I guess you've either done or reviewed. One of the interesting ones, to me, sought to probe the idea that engaging in environmentally friendly behaviors increases the sense of personal control in subjects. Do you know which one I'm referring to?
Yeah, I think that's study number 3. So we gave participants the opportunity to behave in an environmentally friendly way. And then we asked them, like, okay, to what extent do you feel personal control? And in the other condition, we didn't give them this opportunity. We just asked them how much personal control do you feel? And what we found out is that when people just behaved in an environmentally friendly way, or even just expressed their environmental friendly intentions, they already felt that they had more personal control. So the idea that you could do something good for the world, or at least could change something in the world, gives people the idea that you have more personal control.
Another of your studies involved having participants read 2 fake newspaper articles, I see. One stressing the rapidity of scientific progress, and the other suggesting that scientific developments are slow or insufficient. What did the 2 groups do or think after they read these 2 different kinds of newspaper articles?
Well, I think one of them was really about the rapidity, indeed, of science. The other one was not so much that science is insufficient, but more that it is increasing and things are going, like, they're progressing, but just it's inefficient. It's not sufficient enough yet. So human behavior is still necessary. What we saw then was that when people read that science can solve everything, they felt that everything was under control, and they experienced a really high sense of order. And in that, they were less likely to behave environmentally friendly.
And you have a fourth study in which the researchers aim to fully test the proposition that questioning scientific progress enhances feelings of disorder and consequently heightens environmentally friendly attitudes and behaviors, and vice versa. So if people don't believe that science is making rapid or sufficient progress, then they're more likely to engage in personally environmentally friendly behaviors. How did you test that?
Well, we again used the fake articles. So we had people read a newspaper article from the internet, which really looked like it was from the internet side. And one, we again stressed like, okay, science is progressing and it provides solutions to everything. And the other way, we said, okay, it's progressing, it's going further, but it's not going fast enough. And we then saw again that when people thought it was not going fast enough, they would feel that there would be a sense of disorder. And because of that, because they felt that things were not under control, therefore they were more likely to behave environmentally friendly.
There's an irony here that I think I'm seeing, which is that skepticism in science, you're saying, or skepticism about science, leads to more environmentally friendly personal behaviors. And yet, it's those who are skeptical about science who are most likely to be the climate change deniers.
I think there's a difference between being skeptical about science or being realistic about science. I think the problem in the media is now that they often use a progress frame, so they're overstating the progress of science. It's not that you shouldn't trust science or that you shouldn't have trust in the abilities of science, but more that you should be realistic about what science can actually do. So yes, sure, it can provide solutions, but we're not there yet. So it doesn't mean that you don't have to believe in science or feel that we cannot go, that it doesn't solve anything. But I think we should be realistic about what science can actually do and what it can't do.
So you would be skeptical of the reports that we sometimes hear that say, well, it's really technological innovation that's going to solve the climate problem because we'll never conserve our way out. We'll never stop using enough oil or coal, for example, to really make an impact, or we'll never tax it enough to force us to reduce our use. When we're going to get out of it is when we have electric cars that don't use gasoline anymore and other kinds of renewable energies. If you believe in the possibility of renewable energy, that's a belief in the progress of scientific innovation to solve the problem. So you'd be skeptical of all of that.
Well, I would believe in it, but I don't think it will provide a solution right now, right here. I mean, with the solar panels, it's getting better. Not there yet. So sure, it's providing a solution, but still, I think human behavior is necessary as well, and I think that needs to be stressed.
There's one other thing that I think I see around this in environmentalism in this country. Sometimes environmentalists are reluctant to emphasize that people act in personally environmental ways because they're afraid that that will make them think that policy change isn't necessary, when really the environmentalists think the only way we're going to get to anything meaningful is if policy changes so much that it forces the mass numbers of people to make changes in their lives. Otherwise, the only ones who do it are going to be the 5 or 10 or 20% who are environmentally aware, and then they become suckers because they make their lives harder and they don't really solve the problem by themselves.
So your question would be, would it be a good idea to provide the government with
yes,
well,
maybe that would be an interesting thing to test, whether or not people's attitudes about the impact of their own personal behavior might affect the government in terms of making it, providing more pressure for actual policy change.
It would be an interesting question indeed, but I think I would agree with environmentalists at the same time that people find it hard to change their behaviors, especially when it comes to environmental behaviors, because as we just said, I mean, my behavior today won't change anything, not tomorrow, not in 20 years. So yeah, I agree that governments are necessary. But at the same time, if you could believe our research, it could also maybe decrease people's environmental behavior again because they would outsource it to the government.
Yes. In the meantime, the media, and this is your bottom line, I think, shouldn't be so gee whiz about some of the scientific progress that is being made, giving us false hope. Thank you so much for joining us with your research.
Okay, thank you.
Up next, why it's wise to put exactly $19.05 on your MetroCard and other applications of big data to little things. How do you avoid having odd bits of change left over on your MetroCard? What neighborhood should you avoid when riding your bike to work? How accurate are those letter grades on display in restaurants? The answers to these questions are already out there. You just need to know how to visualize the data. Our next guest harnesses the open digital data released by the city for practical purposes. Pratt visiting statistics professor Ben Wellington joins us in our studio to share some of what he has uncovered for his Tumblr blog, iQuant New York. Welcome.
Thank you.
For people who don't know and are shaking their head, I what? Quant.
Yeah, just quantify, just exploring New York through numbers and data.
Should we start with the MetroCard example right off the bat?
That seems to be the one that everyone's most excited about, so sure. The story there was that I noticed that I always had change on my MetroCard, no matter how many times I would refill it or keep on riding. And I went home and did some math and realized that no matter what buttons you push, the presets, you literally can't get a MetroCard with a zero balance, no matter how many times
So
you
if you buy a $10, $20,
Right.
$40 MetroCard.
Right. When you first buy it, it's a $9, a $19, or a $39 because of the dollar fee. So it kind of sets you on this odd amount, and then from there on you do $10 and $20 and $40 refills, and there's no way to zero out your balance ever.
Right, and there we see that screen that so many New Yorkers have seen so
Yep.
many times with the $9, the $19, the $39. But oh, look, below $39 is something called other amounts.
Right, and so I found, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine for a little while, and finally I just went home one day and said, let me just solve this so that I can feel better about my MetroCard, and realized if I type in 1905 at the terminal, when you hit other amounts, you actually get $20 exactly on your MetroCard.
$19.05.
Right. So they offer you $19 as an option when you buy one. So you'll get $19.95 on your MetroCard, which if you do a little math, realize you'll be short a nickel on your last ride. So if you add that nickel up front, you end up with a beautiful $20 MetroCard down to zero, and you can refill to your heart's content.
And if you go up from there, is it by multiples of that? So you do $18.10 if you want to spend a little more money and have a little more at a
Yeah, I
time?
put the numbers. There's a few round numbers on the blog that I actually point out. I can't remember all of the exact ones, but there's sort of key areas where you can hit it and just get an exact round number.
So did you contact the MTA and say, hey folks, why don't you put the numbers on the machines as defaults that will actually come to an even number of rides instead of causing this, this amount of change? Or do you think they actually do this on purpose so they can keep the float?
I kind of imply through the tone of my post that maybe there's something on purpose about it, but of course I don't work there. I don't know their intentions. But I did see that I saw a reporter had reached out to them, and their response was that we don't carry infinite change in our machines, and that's why we have round numbers. And that explanation makes partial sense, but when you remember we have credit card only terminals in most of our stations, that explanation starts to break down.
Right. But
and I haven't heard anything since then about an explanation on why the credit card machines don't have round numbers.
Right. But if I see their point, which is that if it's $19.05, the optimal buy, you're going to get a lot of people putting in a 20, and they're going to have a lot of times 95 cents
exactly.
to distribute this.
So that point makes sense, but doesn't really apply during credit card transactions, and so I'm kind of looking for a fix there, but we'll see.
Interesting. Okay, let's go on to another area where you do seem to have affected public policy and got a fix, at least where one fire hydrant is concerned.
Actually two on blocks right next to each other.
Okay, so tell us about the overarching topic here. It's parking violations.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I decided to have a look at the parking ticket data, which was released this year, which is very exciting to me. You can actually literally see every parking ticket given in New York City, including the license plate, the time, the violation. And I know as a driver in New York, occasionally it can be frustrating when you feel like something is unfair. So I figured I would look for the single hydrant that was generating the most ticket revenue for all of New York City. And sure enough, the top two hydrants were actually adjacent to one another, which raised a little bit of a red flag. When I went and checked it out, there was a hydrant and then what looked like a bike lane and then parking. And so people would park. They wouldn't be really at the hydrant. They felt like they were far enough away because of this sort of bike lane looking infrastructure. And so I wrote about the fact that clearly this is mismarked if this is the top
We have
hydrant.
this. Let's put this image up. There it
Right.
is.
So you can see the car there. I put a little arrow on the hydrant in the back, and you can see there's kind of a space between the car and the curb.
The arrow is in red, so
Yeah.
you can't see the hydrant in that top shot.
Yeah, it's pointing at it. It's kind of small, but it's back there. And so right now that car is illegally parked. There you go. So you can zoom in a bit. So that car would get a ticket because they're in front of a hydrant, even though they're not directly in front of a hydrant. So I wrote about it, and it kind of got picked up by some media outlets, and the DOT responded that they were going to look into it. And to their credit, within a few months, if you scroll down, you'll see the new setup is a new stripes preventing people from parking there.
Aha.
So hopefully saving. It turned out I think it was about $30,000 a year for that hydrant that people were paying tickets and getting kind of confused.
And what those stripes on the pavement really tell you is this is a hydrant zone,
Right.
so you can't park here.
Right. And if you could argue, well, a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't be parking anywhere near hydrants. But if you're getting that sort of revenue from one spot, you can make arguments all day. There's probably something that could be clearer. And I'm really glad that the DOT came through on that without, just kind of saw the error and fixed it. And that was
And
great.
there goes the DOT conspiracy theory that they
Exactly.
were doing this on purpose to generate revenue.
Exactly. Right. Well, it's interesting because the NYPD is doing the ticketing, but the DOT is doing the street design. And so if they don't agree on sort of something, maybe you end up in a situation like this.
And you also looked at who gets parking tickets
Yeah.
in New York City. New Yorkers or people with out-of-state plates,
Exactly, right. And you can, so in that post, I explored, you take for each neighborhood the % of tickets given to people from each state. And so you can see, for example, if you were to look at parking tickets given to people who have New Jersey license plates, they tend to cluster around Midtown. If you look at license plates from people from California, they tend to be in sort of Williamsburg and maybe some of the more hip parts of Brooklyn. And so there's a lot of caveats because the drivers from New Jersey are on a very different trip than the drivers from California.
They're going to work. The Californians are
Right.
probably here visiting people.
But Connecticut you can see in the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side and sort of in parts of the Bronx that are sort of more well off. And so it's an interesting way to start to explore New York's visitors through a very unusual data set.
And is there something about Illinois and Texas in the Bronx that I read?
I can't recall actually. Let's see, Illinois and Texas and the Bronx. I think there might have been clusters, and what happens is with data like this is that there's a lot of noise. And so, for example,
yeah.
you could have a trucking company.
I think it had something to do with some particular trucks.
Okay, yeah, right.
that were
I
there.
think that's right. Yeah, so you have a delivery company who's registered all their trucks somewhere, and they're getting ticketed every day, and so the data gets kind of messy. And so that's the caveat of working with large data sets.
And
like
there's something about a lot of U-Hauls being registered in Arizona, so
Right.
Arizona plates show up a lot, but they're on U-Hauls.
I think so. That's sort of the idea, and near one of the U-Haul depots. And that's the kind of thing that
And we're going to show an image related to this.
Okay,
You'll
yeah.
tell us what we're looking at when
Sure.
it comes up.
It's the kind of thing where I say there's Arizona. So somebody's explanation was a U-Haul explanation out there. People have different reasons. I didn't dive into every individual state and why they were clustered in different
Yeah,
areas.
and it looks like all those Arizona U-Hauls are going to the Rockaways or something.
It might be the case. If we go up a bit though, zoom up towards. So there's California, which I found to be kind of interesting.
Oh,
So
they're
you see
hipsters. They're in Williamsburg.
Exactly, and that kind of makes a lot of sense. And if you go up a little farther, you can kind of see. I got lots of explanations on Florida. Some people thought it had to do with the cheaper insurance and where people were getting that. Others thought it was people visiting and snowbirds and so.
Yeah, the Floridians are in South Brooklyn, so they feel at home.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's unclear.
When you say cheaper insurance, you mean some of the concentration of Florida plates might actually be New Yorkers who've registered their cars down there?
This is not. I'm not in a position to know. I'm just quoting what sort of commenters on the blog or people have emailed me with their suggestions. I try to put the data out there, and these are blog posts, not deep research papers. And so my goal is to get people talking. There's lots of explanations about a lot of this stuff, so
Right.
you have to be careful when drawing conclusions.
Let's go through another few examples of city data that
Sure.
you've parsed and what you've learned. And then I want to talk about the best uses of open data, the best ways that the city should be able to make
Yeah.
data open to the public, whether or not they are. On a very serious note, bike accident hotspots.
Yeah. So that's actually an interesting story. It goes back to around 2012 when I think it was a hearing, city council hearing with Jessica Lappin questioning someone from the NYPD about why they're releasing data on PDFs about accidents. And the response
You mean
was
PDF as opposed to in regular email? or
as
other
opposed
kinds of
to like a
files?
text file where people could actually
Right.
download it and study it, right? So a PDF is really hard to get the data out of. It's kind of an image. And so it's very difficult. If you want to know the number of accidents at each intersection, in a PDF you can look at it and figure that out, but in a text file you can download it and then explore it from using a computer.
Right, a PDF is sort of a read-only file.
Exactly.
Right? So you
It's
can't
not good for computers
copy
to
and
read.
paste the data and do your own number crunching.
Right.
and
I mean, you
things like
can
that.
copy and paste, but you might do it one page at a time,
Yeah.
and it's very inefficient. So what we ask, if people do things like CSV files, where it's just a comma with lots of data in it, and it makes things really easy. So the NYPD, said at the time that they thought people might be trying to make a point of some sort, was I think the exact quote, if we release the data. And they said that they were worried about whether the data was going to be clean enough. And so this guy, Jonathan Krauss, built something called the NYPD Crash Data Band-Aid, which was basically a scraper for the PDF. So he would go to the website of the NYPD every day, and he wrote a program that would check, find the data, extract it automatically, and put it in a text format.
Specifically
for people.
data on bicycle accidents
Yeah,
in
and
this case?
vehicle accidents, yeah, in general. And so I took his output. So he basically made what was not open data. As a citizen, he made it open.
So this actually gets us into the question of how the city releases data and whether they're releasing it to partially obscure
Right.
the truth or to make it as open as they can.
Yeah, and so there's questions about the intention behind it. Sometimes releasing a lot of data opens up a lot of scrutiny, and so maybe people are less comfortable releasing their data sets. But I like to think that the more agencies release data, the more they can get valuable information as well. So it's kind of a two-way street. Take the FDNY. I know they're exploring releasing fire data, fire call data. And I imagine when that comes out, there'll be a lot of people interested in modeling fires. And they might have great ideas to, have you looked at this, have you looked at this, and maybe build a fire predictor. And maybe one day the FDNY can then see that, get users' input and build that into their platform.
So were you able to, on the content of this, glean any important information about where bike accident hotspots tend to be?
Yeah, well, thanks to his hard work making the data open, even though it didn't start open. I was able to make a visualization that you can see here with hotspots of accidents. And so there are some sort of obvious areas in red. Some of it is just because due to bicycle traffic. And
Right, that's where the bicyclists tend to
Right.
go. But am I seeing east side more than west side in lower Manhattan?
That's right, because all the bridges are sort of unloading all the bicycles from Brooklyn into the streets heading north. And you can see other hotspots in different neighborhoods, one in Williamsburg approaching, which is kind of a very dangerous area. And so yeah, it doesn't normalize for bike ridership. So the places with more bikes inherently have more accidents. But that's okay because there are also places we should probably be focusing more. And so I found it to be kind of interesting.
On a lighter note, Brighton Beach is a hotspot for massage therapy, you have discovered.
Yeah, that was a little different spin. I spent a lot of time looking at New York data. Every once in a while I look at some federal data, and that was the Medicare data, open data, and just was curious about in some categories and noticed that each dot.
Oh, there it is.
There you
Now,
go.
what is this actually showing us about Brighton Beach down there?
So
and
if you
massage
can actually, I don't know if you
therapy?
can zoom in that area, but every dot there is a recipient of payments from Medicare for massage therapy.
Wow.
And so you see the size of the circle is the amount of money going to that particular location
So you're
or
looking
doctor.
at federal Medicare data.
Right. And
As
so,
to who's getting paid.
so there's obviously an outlier as to a particular office that's getting
Yeah,
a
it
lot.
looks like it's really probably one massage therapist who
Right.
has really figured out how to bill Medicare.
Right, and he probably has a network of people that are reporting under his name, not illegally necessarily, but it's interesting. But a lot of people, so there were some news articles about this particular guy, but what I thought was interesting was if you zoom out a little more, it's not just him, it's the entire, if we zoom back out, you can see it's the entire neighborhood that seems to be a hotspot, not just this one office.
All those other dots of red.
Right, you don't see that kind of
That's
Medicare.
a lot of massage therapists in one area.
It seems to be, yeah.
All satellite offices of the one, or you don't know?
I don't know, so once again, I didn't dive that deep, but I found it pretty interesting.
All right. What about restaurant grading?
So that came about through some of my work with students at Pratt. And so at Pratt, I teach urban planners about data. And my goal there is to basically show you don't have to be a programmer to work with open data, right? That seems to be, there's a lot of talk of apps and things like that, but anyone can kind of work with data. And so I've been teaching statistics at Pratt, teaching students that they can analyze data with something like Excel without being a programmer. So if you scroll up to the top of this one, scroll up a bit, I'll show you the right there. So what I did here is I took the counts. So every restaurant gets an inspection score, and that number is a number between 0 or higher, where every time you get a violation, you add a point or 2 to your score. So if your food is not hot enough or cold enough, you get 2 points. If you find evidence of mice, you get 2 points, and these points add up to a score. If that score is above 13, you get a B. If the score is 13 or below, you get an A. And what we're finding is the histogram here, the green area is actually the A grades, and the blue area are the B grades. If you believed that this was done sort of fairly, you would expect kind of a smooth transition between A and B. But what we're seeing is that the number of people who get a 13, which is the very lowest A you can get, is 3 times more than the number of people who are getting the lowest B you can get. And so there seems to be some sort of grade inflation going on where the inspectors,
if you're close,
right, then they don't want to push you up. It seems like it. I can't prove it, but that does what the data suggests, right?
I wish my math teacher did that in high school.
Yeah, it's push people over, yeah.
Yeah, if you're close.
When you get the 89.75 is the worst grade.
You don't want that 89 on your report card when you could have the 90. Right. Best place to view fireworks in the city. There's data for that?
That was kind of a tongue-in-cheek approach. I was looking at firework complaints and found that people calling 311 to complain about fireworks might be an interesting indicator of where illegal fireworks were happening. So it probably wasn't the intended use of that complaint data, but...
and there it is. Ooh,
there it is.
Staten Island.
Yeah, so some of the coastal areas seem to be a little more red than others, which you might expect. And about an hour after I published this saying that Inwood was sort of the main area of complaints, there was a New York Times article, not coming from mine, but all about the fireworks in Inwood. And so I was very excited that this kind of 3-on-1 data led to the same location as the reporting did on the ground.
So in general, do you think the city is doing a good job of making data available to the public so that journalists and community leaders and others can use it as effectively as possible to actually make improvements in public life?
Yeah, I think it depends on the agency. I think that some agencies are doing a really good job. 3-on-1 is a great data set. It's updated every day, has programmatic access to it so developers can actually build off of it. But the city also does a lot of building of maps, and an example of that would be Plow NYC. Plow NYC was a great thing because it allowed us to watch our streets being plowed for the first time on a map. But when they did that, they didn't give access to the underlying data, right? So when I went to that site, I was quite disappointed that I couldn't actually start downloading where the plows were and store them somewhere so I can analyze their routes later and maybe look for an optimization of the way they're driving or something like that. So I think the story is that every time they're putting out data, it should come with sort of access to the raw data. I mean, even look at the city budget. The current New York City budget is in PDF format. The city council's done a great job putting their data in a computer-readable format, but the city still, with all the talk of open data, we still are putting out PDFs for our budget. So that should say something.
The next time I talk to the New York City budget director, I should say, make your budget proposals transparent through the data, not just the PDF?
Yeah, I think it would make it easier. And luckily, there are groups of people. I guess there's a group which call themselves sort of civic hackers, right? Beta NYC is a group in New York that Noel Hidalgo is a guy who helps run it. It's part of Code for America, and they're a group of computers, people who are excited about computers and data and are working to build apps to help sort of city officials explore the city. So there's a lot of drive there, a lot of excitement, but we need access to the data to sort of let everyone go at it.
Well, great work and well communicated. Keep digging.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Do you know 5 Points, the graffiti mecca, which couldn't be missed from the number 7 train? It became an international street art destination. But 5 Points was whitewashed into history last year, despite protests by supporters. Condos will take its place. Is that the end of ground-up, neighborhood-level art in the city? Well, far from it, it appears. New York is awash in street art. At least that's the impression you get launching an app and blog called Street Art NYC. The site is run by Lois Stavsky, a former public school teacher turned street art curator, and she joins us now with some images and discussion. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
How can you be a street art curator if the art is out on the street?
Street art curator. Well, I suppose I decide what art is out on the street that should be shared with just about everybody.
So you collect the images
Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
selected images.
Selected images.
Is there a lot of street art taking place, being created in New York right now?
Right now, probably more than ever in the history of the city. Started with graffiti over 30 years ago, has developed into a global movement that spread throughout the world. And right now we have artists coming in from all over the world painting in New York City. So it's not just our native artists, it's become a fabulous center of global art.
And we'll see some examples in a minute, but where do street artists actually draw or paint? Is it on sidewalks? Is it on buildings?
Yeah. Well, when 5 Points was around, that was a favorite destination. And I get at least one email a day asking me from an artist in anywhere. I'd love to come to New York. Do you know of a place where I can paint? And I would always tell them 5 Points. And Meijers, who was running 5 Points, welcomed every artist. It's not that easy now. It's not that easy now. There are a number of places that welcome art, but they'd like to see the art first, and they prefer an artist who's had experience and credentials. But the few central places that are welcoming are Welling Court in Astoria, Queens, certain neighborhoods in the Bronx, Hunts Point, and
Bushwick, I understand?
yeah, and the Bushwick Collective has attracted artists from everywhere.
All right, let's look at some images. I think this first one is a retrospective gallery that went up 4 or 5 points last spring. Is that what that is?
Yep.
Where is that exactly, and where is that presented?
What this is our images on canvas. In memory or honoring 5 Points. This particular gallery exhibit went up after the whitewash.
On canvas, so does that mean that people recreated on canvas things that were on walls and streets?
Often they do. Often they create new work for canvas. Canvases, but the canvases generally reflect the aesthetic of the street artist or graffiti writer. Yeah.
What's the difference between the term graffiti and the term street art? Is there one?
Yeah. Graffiti focuses on letters, style, some characters. Most graffiti writers are self-taught, though not all. And street artists, the work is more conceptual. And many street artists have backgrounds in fine arts, degrees in fine arts.
For those who didn't follow the saga of 5 Points, what do you think the impact has actually been since it got whitewashed and closed to new work? I mean, from what you were saying about how vibrant the scene is right now, maybe it just moved rather than got diminished.
No, what happened is that, yeah, some people were more motivated to find walls, legal access to walls, but I'm waiting for a new 5 Points. There's a definite need for one, and I'm hoping that it happens soon.
All right, we're going to scroll through your site a little bit, and you'll
Great.
tell us about some of these images that we're looking at. What's this?
Ah, this is wonderful. This is the Graffiti Hall of Fame in East Harlem, but it's only once a year. Once a year, the walls change. Artists come from all over the world and do their thing.
These are all examples from
This
the
came up about 2 weeks ago.
Graffiti Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and the focus is graffiti. The focus is graffiti.
And again, with the distinction that you made earlier between graffiti and street art,
Right, notice.
it's hard for me to tell because if graffiti artists are just self-trained and the street art artists tend to be a little more professional, there's some pretty good stuff there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
I often prefer the work of self-taught artists. Yeah.
How about this?
This is really interesting. An old school artist who's now in his 50s, graffiti writer, had the idea of bringing graffiti back to the trains. But you know, we can't do it legally. And this is kind of semi-legal. Well, it's not legal. But what he does is he never takes anything out of these openings, but he looks for empty ones. And he puts in street art, graffiti rather, mostly graffiti.
And he's not doing it on the doors, on the sides of the trains, on the seats.
And
he's only doing it in unoccupied poster spaces.
Exactly, unoccupied spaces. And the reaction from the riders on the train have been so interested. They're all fascinated by, you know, what's going on, what's happening here, and who are these people doing the art, and why are you doing it? It's been great. It's been fun. I've done a lot of these subway rounds with him.
So he would do this in advance and then place it because he knows the dimensions, correct?
Exactly.
He's not like he's
and they're not all
riding
his.
the train.
They're different people.
Oh, they're different people.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes they're all his. And what happened is that people were noticing what he was doing, and others became very interested in contributing to this project.
Right. But they're not sneaking onto the trains with their spray cans and doing it right there.
Yeah, it's Nick 707, an old school artist who conceived of the idea, which I think is brilliant.
Is aerosol still a medium of choice?
Yeah, I'd say so.
What's the future of street art in New York City? Given the trajectory of change that you've seen so far, and you've been measuring it, what do you see 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now?
I really do see it growing. I do. I mean, there are those who argue it will reach a saturation point, but I don't see that happening. There's just so much enthusiasm, and for good or bad, so much interest from the corporate world now.
Corporate world, in street art?
Yeah.
In what way?
They're interested in using images to promote their products from the streets, and they could work for street artists because it could be a source of income for them that could allow them to continue to produce on the streets. Because in order to paint on the streets, one needs to have a source of income.
There's a fine line here, isn't there, between what, let's say, the average person who's not a street artist or not a street art aficionado would call vandalism and would call beautification, would you say?
I wouldn't really say so. I think if people were to follow what's happening on the streets, they would realize that most of it these days really is beautification. To me, vandalism, this is my personal definition, is if you're doing something really ugly on someone's personal property, and that's unforgivable. But I don't think that's what people think of street art these days.
How about all this new affordable housing that the de Blasio administration hopes to build? Do you think there's a conversation around a lot of that new construction that's likely to take place about what kind of street art might be allowed? I'm thinking about 5 Points as a model, maybe on a much smaller scale, depending on the building, but whether this could be an integrated part of the conversation about design.
You know, you may have just started something, because I haven't heard this discussion, but it makes a lot of sense. Makes a great deal of sense. I just read about this happening in Iceland, so it makes a lot of sense.
I think we have one more visual. Do we have one last image to show? Oh, we have a few
the
more.
Bushwick
Okay, take us quickly, because we're going to run out of time.
Actually, this is Bushwick, but not the collective. There are different neighborhoods in Bushwick that are growing as wonderful showcases of art. And there was a festival called the Juicy Art Festival. The above one was an image from that. These are just random images in Bushwick of faces. This was Manhattan.
So if you're not from Bushwick and you're
That's
one
Manhattan.
of those New York,
That's Bushwick. Live your dream. That's Bushwick. Yeah, you need to be on the L train a lot.
right. If you're one of those New Yorkers not from that particular neighborhood who likes to go neighborhood to neighborhood to look around, these are some of the things to look for.
That's Red Hook, yeah. And that was done with young people, with youth.
So does this mean the age of Giuliani is over? Would this have been permitted in the 90s?
Well, most of it these days is sanctioned. It is. The risks for doing it illegally are so great that most of the artists tell me they cannot take that risk. Yeah.
New York is Art City, including on the streets, and as you just heard, most of it sanctioned, permitted, allowed, even maybe recruited.
Absolutely.
Yes, commissioned. Thank you. Do they get paid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many times, not always.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's our program for today. You'll find a new show here at this hour each week. Next time, the climate crisis, which way out? A panel about the strategy and tactics of the climate justice movement that I'll be moderating this Saturday evening, September 20th. It includes Naomi Klein, Chris Hedges, and Van Jones, among others. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders will speak as well. If you can't wait for the abbreviated TV version, do come. The free live event is at 8 p.m. this Saturday at All Souls Church at 80th and Lex. Meantime, tune into my radio program weekday mornings at 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, crowdsourcing a better breast pump. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.